A single podcast clip that dropped less than 3 hours ago just completely obliterated whatever remaining hope the Los Angeles Lakers had of closing the Jonathan Kuminga signing that has been dragging on for basically the entire offseason. And by the time the ESPN panel finished dissecting it live on air, one analyst literally said, and I'm quoting him verbatim here, "That signing is dead, it's officially dead, put it in the ground and pour concrete over it." The topic, Jonathan Kuminga sat down for a nearly 40-minute conversation on a popular player-hosted podcast, and roughly midway through the interview, when the host asked him a completely innocuous question about how his free agency has been going, Kuminga delivered a genuinely shocking public breakdown of exactly how the Lakers front office has handled him throughout this negotiation, complete with specific quotes attributed to Rob Pelinka that, if accurate, represent one of the most damaging front office leaks in recent NBA memory. Stay with me until the end, because this segment turns into a full-blown debate about player empowerment, front office negotiating tactics, and whether Kuminga has just permanently damaged his own market value across the entire league with a single interview. Let me walk you through exactly what Kuminga said before we get to the studio reaction, because the specifics matter enormously here. According to Kuminga, when he sat down for his virtual meeting with Rob Pelinka and JJ Redick early in free agency, the pitch he received was, in his exact words, them explaining why I should feel lucky to even be considered for their roster. He described the tone of the meeting as, quote, condescending in a way I've never experienced in this league before, and specifically claimed that Pelinka at one point during the conversation referenced other wings the Lakers were considering as, quote, more polished professionals who might be available if Kuminga's asking price didn't come down to what the Lakers considered reasonable. He then went into what I think was actually the most damaging portion of the entire interview. Kuminga claimed that after the initial meeting concluded, follow-up communication from the Lakers front office essentially disappeared for nearly 2 weeks, while Pelinka publicly continued to indicate through media channels that the Lakers were actively working to close a deal. According to Kuminga, that public messaging was, quote, completely disconnected from what was actually happening privately, and he specifically accused the Lakers of using the appearance of active negotiations as leverage in their other roster construction moves without ever intending to seriously improve their offer to him personally. The reaction inside the studio when the clip finished playing was genuinely something to witness. One analyst just sat there for probably 5 full seconds before saying anything at all, which if you've watched any amount of live sports television, you know is basically an eternity of dead air. When he finally spoke, his opening line was that this represents, and I'm quoting him directly, the most explicit public accusation of front office negotiating misconduct that I can remember from a currently unsigned free agent in the modern era. Another analyst immediately pushed back, arguing that Kuminga's version of events is inherently one-sided and probably represents a strategically motivated attempt to publicly pressure the Lakers into either sweetening their offer significantly or explicitly withdrawing from the negotiation entirely. That's when the debate really escalated. The initial analyst pointed out that regardless of whether Kuminga's characterization is entirely accurate, the mere fact that he was willing to make these claims publicly on a widely distributed podcast effectively guarantees that the current negotiation is functionally over. No front office can realistically continue serious negotiations with a player who has just publicly attacked their integrity, because doing so would signal to every other player in the league that public pressure campaigns work as a negotiating tactic. Rob Pelinka now has to either walk away from the deal entirely to protect his institutional credibility, or accept a level of public humiliation that damages his authority in every future negotiation he ever conducts. The counter-argument was that Rob Pelinka might actually have to close this deal regardless of the public embarrassment, because the alternative, walking into training camp without a legitimate starting caliber wing to complement Luka Doncic, Austin Reeves, and Walker Kessler, is genuinely worse for the franchise's championship window than absorbing whatever public relations damage comes from finalizing a signing with a player who has just publicly attacked his character. Sometimes swallowing your pride is the correct organizational decision, even when it's personally painful for the executive involved. Then came what I thought was actually the most fascinating angle of the entire discussion, when one analyst raised the question of what this interview actually does to Kuminga's broader market beyond just the Lakers. If a player is willing to publicly torch one prospective employer in this kind of detail during an active negotiation, every other front office in the league now has to seriously consider whether he might do the same thing to them if any future contract dispute ever arises. That kind of public negotiating behavior has historically had a genuinely chilling effect on subsequent contract offers across the league, because organizations rightfully worry about signing a player who has demonstrated a willingness to weaponize public communication against his own team. The rebuttal to that was interesting too. Another analyst argued that this generation of players has fundamentally different views about public transparency in contract negotiations, and that Kuminga's interview might actually enhance his market position with younger, more player-friendly organizations who view this kind of assertiveness as evidence of confidence and self-advocacy, rather than as a warning sign about future locker room behavior. The old rules about players staying quiet in public no longer apply the way they used to, and evaluating this interview through that outdated framework probably misses what's actually happening in the modern NBA. That took the conversation into what might have been the single most heated exchange of the entire segment. One analyst argued forcefully that if Kuminga's account of the virtual meeting with Pelinka is accurate, then the Lakers front office has genuinely conducted itself in a way that reflects poorly on the entire organization, and other free agents watching this situation unfold in real time are going to remember exactly how the Lakers negotiated when their next opportunity to consider Los Angeles arises. That has real, concrete, long-term consequences for the franchise's ability to recruit talent going forward, and no amount of Luka Doncic alpha appeal fully compensates for a front office that develops a reputation for treating negotiations disrespectfully. The counter was immediate and brutally direct. Another analyst pointed out that we are hearing exactly one side of a private conversation, filtered through a player who has enormous financial incentive to characterize events in a way that generates public sympathy and pressure. Front offices routinely discuss alternative options during recruiting conversations, and describing that entirely standard practice as condescending is either genuine misunderstanding by Kuminga or deliberate mischaracterization by his camp. Either way, forming definitive conclusions about Rob Pelinka's professional conduct based on one player's podcast appearance is exactly the kind of premature judgment that responsible analysis should actively resist. Now, here's my honest take on this entire genuinely explosive situation, because I think there are multiple layers of complexity here that both sides of the panel were partially getting right and partially missing. First, I actually think Kuminga made a genuinely strategic miscalculation by going public with this level of specificity. Even if every single thing he said is completely accurate, the practical effect of putting it on a public podcast is to functionally eliminate his ability to sign with the Lakers going forward, because no front office in this league can visibly reward that kind of public pressure campaign without permanently altering the negotiating dynamics of every subsequent recruitment. Where I have more sympathy for Kuminga's position is the underlying frustration with a negotiation that has genuinely dragged on far longer than it should have. Free agency opened weeks ago. The Lakers publicly identified him as their target, and yet no deal has been closed despite multiple rounds of reported communication. Some portion of that delay is undoubtedly attributable to the Lakers' cap constraints and the specific mechanical challenges of executing a sign and trade, but some portion of it might genuinely reflect a front office that wasn't fully committed to closing the deal on terms that Kuminga could accept. The frustration is completely understandable, even if the specific way he chose to express it publicly was strategically counterproductive. Regarding Rob Pelinka specifically, this is now the third significant public relations challenge his front office has absorbed within the past month, following the Austin Reeves comments from Slovenia and the league office's tampering ruling that came down earlier this week. Whether or not any of these individual incidents ultimately affects his job security, the cumulative pattern is genuinely difficult to ignore, and Mark Walter's ownership group is almost certainly paying close attention to how the organization's public image is being shaped during this transitional period. Where I think the panel actually missed something important was in the broader context of how modern player empowerment intersects with front office authority. We're watching in real time as the traditional negotiating framework of the NBA continues to evolve, with players increasingly willing to use public communication as leverage in ways that would have been unthinkable even 5 years ago. Whether you personally view this evolution positively or negatively, the reality is that any front office operating in this environment needs to actively account for the possibility that private negotiating conversations might become public through channels that didn't exist in previous eras. Rob Pelinka and every other executive across this league needs to fundamentally recalibrate how they approach these conversations, assuming that anything said in a virtual meeting might eventually be quoted, accurately or otherwise, on a widely distributed platform where the audience is inclined to sympathize with the player rather than the executive. The Cleveland Cavaliers angle is the one I want to close on because I genuinely believe this podcast interview essentially hands them the Kuminga signing on a silver platter if they're prepared to move quickly. Cleveland has the cap flexibility that the Lakers lack. They've been consistently connected to Kuminga throughout this process, and they now have the unique advantage of being able to complete a signing without any of the public controversy that has accumulated around the Lakers' pursuit. If I'm the Cavaliers front office watching this interview, I'm on the phone with Kuminga's agent within the hour, offering to close a deal within the next 48 hours before anything else can complicate the situation further. That's exactly the kind of opportunity that competent front offices seize decisively, and the Lakers have essentially handed Cleveland a competitive advantage they didn't have to work particularly hard to earn. Do you think Jonathan Kuminga fundamentally damaged his own market by going public with these accusations? Or do you think this is exactly the kind of transparency that modern free agents should be embracing more consistently? Drop your honest opinion in the comments, hit that like button if this breakdown helped clarify what actually just happened, and subscribe to the channel because there's plenty more NBA free agency drama coming your way all week long. See you in the next video.